Councillors, good evening. What a lovely, lovely summer's day. And I'm hoping this is going to be a very agreeable meeting today. And I'm hoping that you're all going to stick to the red and yellow lights, because otherwise I shall be cutting you off. Because we have a very full agenda, and I intend to get through the whole agenda without going into extra time. But it's in your hands that we do that. So with that, no more ado, let's move on, okay? We'll start off with item 1, which is filming at meetings. Please note, there's no scheduled fire alert, and if you do hear a fire alarm, please follow the advice of the security officers here this evening. Please also note, this meeting may be filmed or recorded by the Council for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site or by anyone attending the meeting using any communication method. Although we ask members of the public recording, filming or reporting on the meeting not to include the public seating areas, members of the public attending the meeting should be aware that we cannot guarantee that you will not be filmed or recorded by others attending the meeting. Members of the public participating in the meeting, for example, making deputations, asking questions, making oral protests, should be aware that they are likely to be filmed. By entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings. As chair of the meeting, I have the discretion to terminate or suspend filming or recording if, in my opinion, continuation of the filming, recording or reporting would disrupt or prejudice the proceedings or infringe the rights of any individual or may lead to the breach of a legal obligation by the Council. However, I understand that the deputation party coming here tonight do not want to be filmed. They do not want to be filmed while speaking, but have agreed to have their voices recorded, and I have agreed to respect their right not to be on camera and would ask attendees to refrain from filming the deputation party. So what we will do in that circumstance, we will film more of you, but not the deputation. I hope you agree with all of that. Apologies for absence.
Madam Mayor, apologies for absence have been received from Councillors Carroll, Amin, Dogan and Hinchcliffe.
Any late items for urgent business?
There are 2 late items of business which could not be available earlier and which will need to be dealt with at this meeting. Item 10C, this report was late in order to allow finalisation of the report and legal comments to be added. Item 12, questions and written answers. The reason for lateness is that notice of questions is not requested until 8 clear days before the meeting, following which the matters raised have to be researched and replies prepared to be given at the meeting.
Thank you. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Under the Council's agreed Code of Conduct, members are required to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or prejudicial interest as defined by the Code at any meeting and may not participate in any discussion or vote on the matter and must withdraw from the meeting room. Details of the requirement to make a declaration of interest are shown on your printed summons at item 4. Should you need to make any such declaration, you should do so now by clearly stating the reasons and the nature of the interest. Members with a sensitive interest, as defined in the Code, must declare they have disclosable interest, but the details of that interest need not be disclosed. Would anybody here present like to declare an interest? Thank you very much. Item 5, minutes of the Council.
Madam Mayor, I would ask the Council to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of May 2019.
Are they agreed? Thank you. Now, some of you, I think, would have received my Mayor's communications. Again, to save time, I've had them printed out for you. And if you request, I can also send it to you by email. However, there's 2 items I would like to bring to your attention. First of all, the events that I am the deputy have attended have been far more than what I've written. So if you want a more in-depth disclosure, I will let you have that. But I would also call on Councillor Mark Blake and Councillor Morris, who will be speaking on the Council's borough intolerance of racism following the recent appalling incident of racial abuse experienced by Council Oakwood. Ojifor? Have I said it right? I hope. Councillor Mark Blake, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think, like everyone else here, I was shocked and frankly angered to hear about the racist abuse that one of our fellow councillors had to endure on the 21st of June. Hear, hear. Councillor Odyahor was on her way home on the tube when 2 men subjected her to a 15-minute racist inquisition, aggressively and repeatedly demanding to know where she was from and where she was really from. It was a vicious attack built on the racist assumption that on the basis of ethnic origin, some of us might be any less of a citizen of this city or this country than anyone else. I wanted to take this chance to emphasise that Councillor Odyahor, of course, has our full support and that the Council is working with the British Transport Police to offer any help we can with their investigation. Haringey does not tolerate racism or discrimination and is an open and diverse borough, and we will work proactively to keep it that way. I'm sure most of you will know that when a picture of the incident was posted to Twitter, members of the public helped to identify the 2 men as members of a Hertfordshire golf club, which has already suspended them. While Twitter can often be a hive of intolerance, I'm glad to say that on this occasion it showed that it can also be a place of collective ingenuity. I will, of course, provide updates to members as the police case develops. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I can safely say that everyone today finds the racist attack that Councillor Ogyhor suffered 2 weeks ago vile. We know people hold lots of dark prejudices, but I was shocked they'd be brazen enough to yell them in a public place in front of witnesses. However, even worse is the context Councillor Ogyhor has given for this crime. London is rightly known as a diverse and welcoming city, but even here, hate is often on display. Councillor Ogyhor says that every single person of colour she knows has to deal with racist abuse on a regular basis, and it's getting worse. She's been abused on the tube before, and now feels forced to look down a little bit more than other tube passengers to avoid attracting unwelcome attention. Councillor Ogyhor is very clear about the lesson she wants us to take away from what happened to her. One of the few positives about the incident was the 2 fellow passengers who stepped in to support her. We should all aim to be that person. And we should all try to speak up if we ever witness someone being abused. And we should encourage and support people to come forward and report attacks so that the full scale of the hate crime problem can be known. As politicians, it is our duty to take a very strong and public stand against not only racism, but all forms of bigotry and prejudice. So I'm very proud that this Council has adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia and the IRHA definition of anti-Semitism. And tonight our group will be proposing a motion to support LGBT+ inclusive education in our borough, which I hope will be supported by our Labour colleagues.
Thank you.
I haven't finished.
You have.
Thank you.
You have. Sadly, this evening, we haven't got with us Councillor Hinchcliffe. He reported to me about the passing of Heather Thorpe, who was an ex-councillor for Crouch End between 1982 and 1986. And I'm proposing that we do a minute's silence for Heather. But also, I would like you to stand and think about Councillor George Meehan, whose birthday is actually tomorrow, if he's still been alive, and he passed away 4 years ago. I'm quite shocked, actually, that it's 4 years since he was here with us. So can you please all stand for Heather and George in your thoughts? Thank you very much. Item 7, Report of the Chief Executive.
Madam Mayor, please can the meeting note the changes to the member appointments to the North London Waste Authority and Create, taken as an urgent decision between council meetings. This is as set out on pages 13 to 15 of the agenda pack.
Is that noted? Thank you. Can I now call on the Monitoring Officer?
Madam Mayor, please can the meeting note the summary of the minor changes to the Constitution which are set out in pages 17 to 18 of the full Council agenda pack, and these have been made in accordance with Part 2, Article 1403 of the Council's Constitution and referenced in paragraph 1 of the report. Members may also consider the detail of the changes which are set out from pages 21 to 154.
Is that noted? Thank you. Now we move on to deputations. I have accepted one deputation to this evening's meeting from Haringey Gypsy and Traveller Liaison Group, supported by London Gypsies and Travellers. I call on David Morn, who is joined by Eileen Morn, Margaret Morn, Willie McDonough and Margaret McDonough, and they have 5 minutes to speak.
We are Haringey travellers and we feel that our needs have been ignored for far too long. Some of us live on one of the two traveller sites, Clyde Road, others live in bricks and motorhomes. But we would like to live on a site, but there are only 10 pitches in the borough and there are estimated to be 405 travellers living in housing, according to the last needs assessment, which was 2008. We don't know exactly how many gypsies and travellers need pitches because the gypsy and travellers need assessments that was completed in 2015 was never published. We would like to know why. On the 2nd of July 2015, a planning policy officer told a member of staff in London Gypsies and Travellers that there was a need for 11 to 18 new pitches. None of these have been built. One site was identified for new pitches in 2017 in the site allocations local plan. This is Vale Road, Eid Road, but no pitches have been built here. Why not? We have been told that the planning department has had discussions about possible new sites for us. Where are they? The two traveller sites have fallen into despair. There has been no refurbishment or sufficient repair work done for 30 years. The two staff and the travelling people's team died last year. They have not been replaced. We don't know if their posts were deleted or just vaccinated. Now there is no one in the council to look after our needs. We feel that our whole community has been neglected. We would like to be consulted on the structure of this team and the job descriptions of new posts replacing those that are lost. There are council car parks next to the two traveller sites, Clyde Road and Walman Place. Both car parks are development sites. The council already wants to develop them, so why can't the traveller sites to be expanded into the car parks? This would help ease the overcrowding. We know that there are many council-owned parcels of land that are identified for development. Some of this should be for council housing and where new council homes are built. Traveller pitches could be part of that development. We have identified some within the site allocations, local plan that could become traveller sites. We would like the council to talk to us about developing these sites. The GLA is keen to fund refurbishments of existing traveller sites and extensions to these sites. The GLA also is keen to fund new sites. This requires match funding and application from Haringey. We would like to see progress on agreeing capital funding for this work. The ball is in your court. We find it unacceptable that there is no policy for allocating travellers' pitches in Haringey. A new policy should be a priority so that when new pitches are built there is a fair allocation process. London Gypsies and Travellers had offered to advise on the consultation needed and the shape of a new policy. They have experience in helping Hackney to introduce a fair policy. Please make use of that experience. We have already started discussions with councillors and council officers, and so far 200k has been identified to address historic despair, with a further 100k in the following year. We are grateful for this money, but it was only offered in response to our commitment. It really shouldn't have summed to this point. Our community should already have access to the same resources available to those in other types of council housing. We have submitted a question and we hope we receive a helpful answer. Our question is, will Haringey Council provide a strategy and timeline for the following? Repair and refurbishment existing traveller sites to disability accessible standards, including redeveloping amenity blocks and expanding existing pitches. Provide a travelling people's team structure or 2 FTE posts within the housing to manage the sites and travellers' issues. Provide enough new sites to deal with the estimated access need of 405 house travellers, including the Vale Eid Road site, which is already identified for travellers in site allocations 017. Expand existing traveller sites into the Civic Centre car park and the Lawrence Road car park, which are development sites within the council's ownership. Agree match funding with the GLA for the refurnishment and extension of the existing traveller sites and the provision of new sites. Consult on and adopt a pitch allocations policy. What's that? Oh.
Right, now I would like you to say there to answer questions. So anybody here would like to ask any questions of the deputation? Okay.
When did you first raise your concerns with the council, and when did you have the first discussions, as you pointed out, that funding was available to you?
Any other questions? Yeah.
You've said you've identified sites in the site allocation. Can you tell us where you've identified these sites?
There's land in St Anne's Road that we've already looked at, and there's land in West Green Road that we've looked at, and there's about 8 more that we haven't checked out yet, but there is, and there's other sites, and there's land there for sites. We've checked out a couple of them.
Councillor Rice.
Yeah, you said that you raised with the council your concerns in May this year. What was the response to your concerns?
So I can answer that. I'm from London Gypsies and Travellers, Tanya Murat, community development worker. So we initially met with councillors for the Clyde Road site, also councillors for the Warman Place site, and we're currently awaiting a date for a meeting with Councillor Ibrahim to discuss all the issues, but also the question of new sites and the expansion of the existing sites. Some of the officers have been present at those meetings, and they've identified £200,000 within the HRA for the 2 existing sites this year, and we're asking that the urgent refurbishment work gets started straight away.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes?
Thank you. I just wondered if you could give any examples of other London authorities that have gypsy and traveller communities, maybe London authorities that you think are exemplars in this. Are there other authorities that we could learn from, perhaps maybe go and visit and talk to them about their strategy?
Yeah, just on that again, sorry, on the Hackney question. London Gypsies and Travellers, one of our members of staff is a Hackney traveller, and she'd be very pleased to meet with councillors to discuss the good work that's been done there in terms of getting new sites, and also the upkeep of sites, and the fact that they do have somebody that deals with travelling people in the council that does a good job.
Thank you. Nick?
Thank you very much. You mentioned that the Gypsy and Traveller Needs Assessment was completed in 2015 but never published. Were you given a reason why it wasn't published?
No, they didn't give any reason.
Dawn?
Thank you. Sorry, just on the Gypsy and Traveller Needs Assessment, and it might not be you answering this, is that for Haringey or across London?
Good.
Right, with nobody else, so I call on the Cabinet Member for Housing and Estate Renewal and the Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Sustainability to respond.
So, thank you, Councillor Peacock. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to respond. Sorry, my name's Councillor Ibrahim. I'm going to respond both for myself and Councillor Hearn. So I'm glad you've raised the issue of the needs assessment that was commissioned, and this is from a planning perspective. So the Council commissioned a needs assessment in 2017. So I'm not aware of one that took place in 2015, but I can certainly look into that, and I can ask officers to kind of backtrack and look what happened to that original one. But the one that was commissioned in 2017 was also not published. And that was due to the fact that at the time the Council was awaiting the publication of the Inspector's report on the final adoption of the London Plan before finalising and publishing the needs assessment. So as you know, Tanya, we have been in discussion with the GLA around the time frame of that as well. But also, just so that you know, the Council will be starting a local plan review this autumn, so that's in a few months' time, and we will be allocating sites according to the needs set out in that needs assessment. So we are taking the issues that you've raised extremely seriously. You'll be glad to know that I've been in discussions with some of the ward councillors recently for some of the wards which have existing traveller sites in them, and we are taking very seriously looking at sites. I mean, the sites that you mentioned, particularly Clyde Road, and you mentioned, was it Vale Road as well? So it's something that we're going to try and take a kind of very holistic approach to, because I'm sure you will understand that an issue that's as complex as this needs something, a new kind of holistic response to. What I'm pleased about is that you've also recently met with Councillor Blake as well, particularly around some of the wider issues faced by the community, and we're currently arranging for you to come and meet with me. What I'm aware of is that you asked for a full written response to your deputation, and I'm pleased to hear that, actually, because it will allow us to do the response far more justice than we can do in this meeting here. So I'm looking forward to meeting with you, and I know there's an ongoing dialogue with the GLA about how we respond to what I think are one of the most important issues facing Haringey at the moment, because we have, like you rightly identified, made this huge commitment to housing across the borough, and that means that everybody should be included in that, and that it must be something that takes into account the needs of all the multiple communities that we represent. So I do look forward to meeting with you, and I'm sure Councillor Hearn will be part of that conversation as well. So this is going to be exciting times in terms of our new site allocation programme, and again, like I said, I look forward to meeting with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your deputation tonight. Obviously, the councillors are very interested in this topic, and so am I, because when I was a head teacher, I actually had the Haringey Travellers teacher based in my school, and I had many of your children for housed travellers in my school. So thank you again very much for coming here tonight. Item 10, reports from committees. First, can I call on the Cabinet Member for Communities and Equalities, Councillor Mark Blake. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The community safety strategy I'm seeking to get endorsed tonight from full council. We've had a lengthy consultation process that this has gone through with the partnership, with police colleagues and health and schools and voluntary sector partners through this process. The priorities are not going to be a surprise. Serious youth violence still dominates the agenda, and obviously today the Mayor of London gave a major speech, and I think it was a very useful speech and a very useful piece of research that he's commissioned at City Hall. We also want a real focus in terms of creating an environment where more young women and girls can report acts of sexual offences. The record in this sphere, Madam Mayor, isn't where we want it to be, and we need to improve on that. And I think particularly we do want to have some focus within that in terms of changing attitudes amongst young men, which I think specifically links in terms of the whole agenda around social education within schools. Finally, Madam Mayor, I really want to stress in terms of how we take this forward that we want to do that across all of the relevant council strategies, and particularly the young person at risk strategy, which came for approval a few months ago to Cabinet. But also within that, I want to stress the role of community engagement. Within community safety, I'm absolutely determined that's going to be part of the way that we work. We had here in the committee rooms last week a meeting with community representatives from the Wood Green area. I think we had over 70 people within the room. We're doing another one next week in Tottenham and another one in Muswell Hill. So we want this to be a feature sort of moving forward in terms of how we work, to have that challenge from the local community, but also to be developing those relationships, to be building those bridges, Madam Mayor, because in order of addressing these challenges, we've got to be working with the community. Thank you.
Is that recommendation on the cover report agreed? I can now call on the Chair for Overview and Scrutiny, Councillor Das Nevis.
Thank you, Chair. Chair and fellow councillors, I'm pleased to present the Overview and Scrutiny Annual Report 2018-19. I'd like to thank all those who engaged in the process of forming our work programme and delivering it. I'd also like to thank our two outgoing panel chairs, Councillor Demir and Councillor Gordon. Councillor Gordon has shown tireless commitment to the ongoing review of Ward's Corner and has placed the concerns of our residents above all else, and no doubt is a real example to us all in that respect. I'm proud to have led and been part of planning a programme that was led by the concerns of our residents and the community. I'm proud that it's the first time that we have reported and that the committee has responded to the individual items that our community has raised and has reported back on each individual one. It is also the first time that we now have a regular mailing list for those who are really interested in what we're doing in scrutiny, and that reporting back to our residents so they know what we're doing and why. A few highlights of our work this year include an interim review on fire safety in high-rise blocks, reviews of complaints to the Council and to the Ombudsman, input into the Adult Social Care Review, a review of special educational needs provision and associated matters, input and discussion into parks maintenance and scrutiny of police and community safety, and of course questions of regeneration, housing and specifically Ward's Corner. And we have questioned Cabinet members and shared with them the questions directly given to us by members of the public and our community. We've endeavoured to look forward and increase the involvement of pre-scrutiny, asking questions and informing future decisions before they happen in a collaborative and challenging manner. As budget challenges continue, we see our role in live budgeting as very important, as demonstrated in recent participation in a session on the potential savings and invest-to-save plans in children's. Going forward, we in Scrutiny, as in the Council as a whole, face the challenge of prioritising the most important things for our residents with the most impact. We continue to champion their concerns and their questions and welcome and invite them in to engage in scrutiny. And therefore I recommend our report to you.
Thank you very much for not taking up your full time. Is the recommendation and report agreed? Thank you. I now call on the Chair of Standards, Councillor Apuku. You also have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the recommendations of the Staffing and Remuneration Committee as set out in the Standards Committee report.
That was lovely. You caught me by surprise. Well done. Well done. Is that recommendation and report agreed? Thank you so much. Let's move on to the Haringey debate. The impacts of austerity on communities. And later on, I have 10 speakers. The Haringey debate. To remind members of the process, this debate will be introduced by a member of the Labour group, who will have up to 5 minutes to introduce the item. Their guest speakers will have up to 10 minutes to introduce the topic and provide information to members. We will then start the debate of up to 30 minutes. I'd like to invite the Leader of the Council to introduce the debate.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I have to say that I thought that we were going to get the speakers before people had to listen to me, but I'm happy to go the other way around. I'm very pleased today that we have Reverend Nicholson and we have Jeffrey Ocean here today to talk about their experience with the people they deal with on a daily basis about how austerity impacts upon people in this borough. I believe there's an argument that councils, particularly Labour councils, have been almost too efficient at protecting the residents within their boroughs from the worst ravages of austerity. Ordinary residents have suffered in the name of balancing the books. And do you know what? Under this Conservative government, the books still aren't balanced. The people who believe in austerity, the people who propagated this, the people who lied their way through 2 elections have got what they wanted. Less money spent on public services and tax cuts for the richest. Indeed, you can see the same agenda being pursued as Boris and Hunt seek to get elected as the next Conservative Prime Minister by one of the least representative, the least diverse cohorts of Britons imaginable. I say the next Conservative Prime Minister, I think we're all hoping that it's going to be the last Conservative Prime Minister. So what's happening in Haringey as we approach the 10th year of austerity? The reality is that austerity is an ideological choice. It's a political choice that has profoundly shaped our communities here in Haringey. Ask any Year 12 economic student. They'll tell you the easiest way to get debt down as a percentage of GDP was to get the economy growing faster. Higher productivity, strong real wage growth and rising living standards. Austerity is also an ideological choice because it's implemented by politicians who are indifferent to the people who suffer the consequences. How else can you explain the willful underfunding of adult social care? How else can you explain the bedroom tax or universal credit? It's not that they don't know what damage is being done. The reality is that they just don't care. And it's a political choice used to reduce the efficiency of local government and to undermine the welfare state, redistributing wealth and power away from the hands of working people and into the hands of those who already have wealth and power. Here in Haringey, since 2010, this council's spending power has reduced by £405 per resident. Austerity has meant that we've had to close most of our youth centres, closed care homes, closed both adult and children's day centres, reduced expenditure on our parks, reduced the staff numbers that we employ by 40%, cut back services across all departments. We now have 12,000 more people in temporary accommodation than we have accommodation available to house them. 3,000 households in Haringey live in overcrowded accommodation. In-work poverty is a significant issue for many of our Haringey residents. 34% of our residents live below the poverty line. Workers in 90% of households earn below the London living wage. This is a scandal. These policies have been so devastating that in last November the UN sent a rapporteur on a 2-week fact-fighting mission to investigate the impacts of austerity across Britain. The report highlights record levels of hunger and homelessness, falling life expectancy, fewer community services. Meanwhile, government ministers remain oblivious to the problem and insist that their policies are running according to plan. However, despite the impacts of austerity here in Haringey, we are doing our best to turn the corner and we are trying to invest in key public services. We've invested £1 billion. We are investing £1 billion to deliver 1,000 additional council homes over the next 3 years and to improve our existing council housing stock. We've extended council tax relief to 100% for our least well-off residents, meaning up to 6,000 will now be eligible for a discount of up to 100%, saving these families on average around £250 per year. We've secured £1.5 million over the next 3 years to invest in reintroduce detached youth workers, and we're investing an additional £250,000 each year as we launch our Young People at Risk strategy. We have to take a public health approach to addressing youth and gang violence in our borough because the national government just doesn't care. And finally, community wealth building. We're developing this as a direct response to these challenges. It aims to reorganise the local economy, to put control back into the hands of local communities, so that wealth is broadly held with local roots where benefits can be recirculated.
Thank you, Councillor.
We're working...
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank
you. I'm sorry. Thank you. No, I did it to Councillor Morris and I'm doing it to you. Please take your seat. We now start the debate, and members have up to 3 minutes to make their contributions, and I shall be strict on that as well. Can I start with Councillor Dixon, please?
Speakers.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Jeffrey. Sorry, Paul. Jeffrey, can you come to the rostrum there and press the button? So, you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm told we got 5 minutes, or to be precise, 4 minutes and 59 seconds. Yeah, we'll try and do that. All right. Thank you very much for inviting us. My name is Jeffrey Olsen. I'm Chief Executive of Bridge Renewal Trust. And we are a voluntary sector. We are charity based in Tottenham, but we are also, since 2016, the Council's strategic partner for the voluntary sector, which means we work together to try and make the sector stronger, fundraise more money, and get everyone working together. So I'm going to quickly talk through 4 or 5 areas where we think austerity has had a severe impact. And it won't be surprising that lots of these things will be rather negative, but that's the context of this important debate. The first thing we want to start with is the voluntary and community sector. We've mapped over 1,200 voluntary and community groups in Haringey, and I want to preface by saying the sector is actually lots of good organizations and groups doing lots of good work, so it's quite vibrant, but it could be better and it could do more. And one of the biggest problems we see is probably twofold. One is around funding, because I think there's lots of passion, there's lots of people really believing in what they do, but I think some people need a little help, others need a lot of help. How do we provide that? And what we've been trying to do, recognizing that lots of funding, actually pre-austerity, probably lots of this were funded by the council or some central government department, and a lot of this, understandably, has been cut or reduced. So we've been working to see how we can get whatever council funding there is, but help to work with the council and other partners to leverage funding externally. And that's beginning to really happen in the last year or so quite successfully. The other thing that is also an issue is around community buildings or accommodation. And this is about having affordable accommodation for lots of these groups who don't have lots of money. And again, there's been discussion. Last week we had a discussion with Councillor Blake and others with voluntary sector. We had 70, 80 of us there. How can we make this, solve this problem? And how can we make space much more available and shared, I think, potentially in an affordable way? And a lot of things has been, because of austerity, we've had to think of different ways of doing things. So lots of groups have been doing the same thing for 20, 30 years. And some of these, for example, say, we are an advice center, or we are this and we are that, and we work with young people in this way and that way. So it's about rethinking sometimes also how things are done. The second thing I want to then come to is, to finish on the voluntary sector, he said we are quite pleased that the Fairness Commission has picked this support for the sector as an important thing, because we also know that the community do trust the sector and will want to work with the sector and want the sector to be strong. I want to touch on a couple of things that people we work with, i.e. community groups or indeed residents themselves tell us, which is around housing. I think the leader has referred to this. I think lack of council properties or lack of properties or accommodation is a big thing, and people have a problem also with the private sector as well, where family says it's too expensive for most families and people, and houses in multiple occupation is a problem there in terms of poor condition and overcrowding. One resident said, for example, I'm concerned about the numbers of homeless people in Haringey. Some of them are on streets with their children and they suffer poor health. They should be given medical assistance and as well as dental and psychological tests and access to public shower room, more buildings to be built specifically for homeless people. The other thing we have is, Councillor Blake mentions, around children and young people, lots of things around fear of crime and the impact that's having on communities. And they like to see more done. I mean, a resident told us young people have no future if things remain the same. The young people need peer mentoring, youth clubs, employment, training, and much more. And the other thing I want to touch on is health and social care, which again has been alluded to. And there's a feeling that the cuts are making delivery of high-quality health social care difficult. People recognise it's not necessarily the council's fault, but they realise this is a bigger thing. But something needs to be done. And mental health is the other thing that's particularly in schools and in the community. The final thing I want to touch on is on prevention and early help. And residents and people do want to do things for themselves, but they need a bit of help, as I said. But they also value multi-agency working, where their problems can all be solved in a joined-up way, in perhaps a one-stop shop. And I know that the council and lots of partners are beginning to do that.
I have to cut you off.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I now call on Reverend Paul Nicholson. You also have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed for asking me to speak to this debate. The common land in the London Borough of Haringey and throughout London is bartered away to powerful international and national property developers. Even the freeholds of small businesses are seen to be fair game by the powerful. Communities are destroyed, families end up in temporary accommodation, individuals on the streets. Food banks attempt to satisfy the hunger of those for whom rents have become unmanageable. In 2010, austerity was piled on top of a UK land market which had already been punishing low incomes with high uncontrolled rents for 30 years. Thatcher abolished rent controls, deregulated lending and allowed the free flow of funds in and out of the United Kingdom. That meant money poured into a market in short supply, forcing up rents and prices. Major, Blair, Brown, Cameron, Lib Dem coalition may have let it rip. Boris Johnson told the Conservative Conference in 2010 Labour's policies, which centre on the building and control of state-owned housing, are diametrically opposed to the interests of most families. What he doesn't understand is that it's only on state-owned land and other land taken out of the market by community land trusts that truly affordable homes for low-income households have been and can be built. The consequence of throwing land into a UK market housing in short supply is that there are ever more homeless families in temporary accommodation or homeless individuals on the streets. There were 48,000 such families in England in 2010, 83,700 in 2018, with 124,000 children, an increase of 74%. Many of them are in work. 56,000, or 68% of them, are in London, and just under 3,000 of the homeless families are in temporary accommodation in Haringey, with 5,208 children under 18. Some have been there for over 10 years. Some families have been in emergency accommodation for 2 years, when the legal limit is 6 weeks. There are no solutions in sight at national or local level. There is nothing to stop the number of homeless families in temporary accommodation increasing to hundreds of thousands in London. High rents with low incomes is a toxic mixture. There's a community of about 11,000 social security claimants in Haringey. The shredding of their social security income since 2010 has been piled on top of decades of benefit negligence for single adults and couples. It's the adult benefit that suffered. It is helping to create the growing disaster facing renters. JSA of £73.10 a week for a single adult is the lowest level of benefit income. £73.10 a week equates to £317 a month universal credit. One way or the other, it's paid to nearly 4 million people in England and to 11,000 here in Haringey. It is paid to all claimant households. More is added for couples, families, children, disability, council tax and housing. The absolutely crucial point is that the hopelessly inadequate adult unemployment benefit cannot maintain a healthy diet for adults, let alone pay the rent. And it has to, because rent has been, and council tax benefits have been cut. I know council tax has been enormously helped here in Haringey. So therefore, the benefits intended for the health and well-being of children or for the health and well-being of disabled people have to pay the rent on pain of eviction. And that is a cruel catch-22. If your children's benefits pay the rent, they are hungry, naked or cold. If you feed or clothe the growing children and keep them warm, then the family is evicted and homeless. I have emailed what I would like to have said, because there wasn't enough time to say what needs to be said, to you all, and I ask you to look at the solid evidence of austerity damaging health, in particular Professor Danny Dorling, Beyond Reasonable Doubt, The Deaths and the Blame, Dr. Chris Gover, Understanding Austerity as Structural Violence and Social Murder, and Professor David Robinson, Child Health Unravelling in the UK.
Thank you very
Social
much.
security needs to be
Reverend
rebuilt
Nicholson.
on moral principles. Love your neighbour as yourself. Peace is not only the absence of conflict, it's the presence of health and well-being. And we hold that land exists for the common good. It provides the basic needs for shelter, food, fuel, clothing, which everyone should have just a minimum share.
Jeffrey, could you switch off the mic, please? I'm being strict tonight because I want to get everybody a fair chance to speak. And if people run over their time, it's stopping other people. I'm now going to call on up to 8 members of the council to speak. And I'm going to start with Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll do my very, very best to keep to the 3 minutes. After 9 years of cuts to public spending, our communities are struggling at the hands of this Tory government. Despite years of the major parties pushing a consensus that austerity was the only game in town, I'm glad that both parties represented in this chamber are singing from a different hymn sheet to what we were in 2010 and 2015. Today, I want to set out some of what a Liberal Democrat government would do differently. And considering some of the latest polls and the fact that we beat both Labour and the Conservatives in the European elections, such a scenario does not feel entirely out of the question right now. Our vision is in the great tradition of great Liberals such as Keynes and Beveridge, of investment and strong public services. And it's one that recognises as well the difficulties of delivering this if we end up with a no-deal Brexit. Lib Dems believe investment in communities and restoration of our public services cannot wait. In the IPPR's recent report entitled "There is an Alternative, Ending Austerity in the UK," one of the clear messages was that for middle-income earners to feel comfortable paying more tax, they needed to know that those on the highest incomes were paying their fair share. We agree. This is why we would reverse the cuts to corporation tax, reverse the raising of the inheritance tax threshold, and reverse cuts to capital gains tax. This is a far cry from Boris Johnson's calls for tax cuts to the wealthiest, as well as McDonnell's failure to oppose budget tax cuts for the rich. By doing this, we know that people will be more than happy to pay their fair share to ensure excellent public services. This is why we reaffirm our pledge to put a penny on income tax to raise billions of extra pounds for our NHS. Unlike the Labour Party, in the last general election, we actually made a very clear commitment to reverse a number of the Tories' cuts to welfare to make sure people have the support they need to live in dignity and to help them back into work. Examples of this would be reversing cuts to housing benefit and, indeed, recognising where we as a party got it wrong and scrapping the bedroom tax. We also want to see greater funding, of course, for local government and an end to small one-off settlements. Because if we want first-class public local services, we have to be willing to fund them. Just one example of what we could do to help communities like Haringey with that extra money would be to see a greater expansion of youth service provision, something that would also be strengthened by seeing that provision put on a statutory footing as well. There's a lot more that I could say on this, but I hope this gives you a flavour of what we would do differently. I also hope that the message from this chamber today is one that is united and clear. We must end austerity and start investing again in communities like Haringey. The people deserve better than austerity, and especially austerity that is turbocharged by a hard Brexit. Thank you.
Many thanks. Many thanks. Councillor Brabazon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I thank our speakers for introducing the debate? It's always a pleasure to listen to Reverend Nicholson in particular about the issues of public land. The first stage of austerity was 1945 to 51, and how different that was. The country was broke, skint, but the Labour government, the magnificent Attlee government, introduced the National Health Service, introduced council house building, nationalised the railways, nationalised gas, electricity, coal, all our natural resources. And they produced an environment, a culture, where people were cared for, where the state was benign, where it actually demonstrated to children, to families, to old people, that it cared. And all the rubbish that has been talked in subsequent years about the nanny state just undermined the brilliance of that period. The people were free of stigma. It was true, it was from cradle to grave. And one of my great heroes, Nyron Bevan, he was Minister not just for health, but also for housing. So what a contrast with this current and seemingly unending and relentless austerity. But unlike the post-war years, the country is not broke. We're the sixth richest country in the world. And austerity is a political choice. We all know that, and we're all agreeing it's a political choice. And none of my political choice, or probably yours, are the product of right-wing, seriously right-wing neoliberal ideology led by Cameron, Osborne and Gove, dressed up as social liberals. But the reality of their political decisions is that our public services, our social infrastructure, our social safety nets have been systematically dismantled, and poor people are now stigmatised. Our policies are more reminiscent of the Poor House and the Tudor Poor Law than they are of any welfare state that I recognise, and the welfare state that gave me every opportunity because I'm old enough to have grown up in the 1950s. We're seeing the results of these policies every day and everywhere. Families with no permanent home, huge increases in children living in poverty and reliance on food banks, irrespective of being in work or unemployed. People are living on the streets. We see diminution of employment rights, increase in mental ill health and privatisation, creeping privatisation of our schools, and of course our universities have long been privatised. We contrast that with increased profits for the rich, reductions in corporation tax and housing policies which favour those who can purchase these safety deposit boxes in the sky. But we know local government has been hardest hit, and quite intentionally. In children's alone, we have hundreds of statutory obligations we need to meet and a crisis in funding caused by deliberate government cuts. And the same is true for adult social care.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brabazon.
Okay.
Thank you.
One more sentence.
No.
And I sincerely hope the next Labour government will get rid of the ludicrous situation of funding local government on business rates and council tax.
Can I remind all members that lights are here not just to decorate this dais, okay? And I'd like you to be observant when you're speaking to occasionally look up to see if the yellow one, and if the yellow one comes on, you know that soon the red one will come on, okay? So can I call on Councillor Morris, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to thank the Bridge Renewal Trust and Paul Nicholson for speaking to us this evening. Cuts to public services have gone too deep and lasted too long. The British people deserve some relief from the impact of austerity, but that won't happen until Brexit is stopped. The European Union is by far our largest trading partner. Our fellow Europeans buy 48% of our exports. That makes any threat to our ability to trade freely with them an economic disaster in the making. The scale of that disaster depends on the type of Brexit we face. Sadly, every sign from the Conservative leadership race is that the next Prime Minister is going to bluster, bluff and bumble to us towards leaving with no deal. The LSE Centre for Economic Performance estimates that the disruption, loss of exports and reduced competition associated with that would drag down the UK's national income by as much as 8.7% over the next decade. That would mean public sector spending reduced by £78 billion. Let me make that more meaningful. If you added it to the government's budget, you could more than double spending on local government. Take it away, and that's the equivalent of cutting this council's entire revenue budget 312 times over. What this should tell us is that there is no credible way to be pro-Brexit but anti-austerity. We know this because Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, and the Labour leadership, have spent 3 years trying and failing to find a way to square that circle. What communities in Haringey and across the country need is a progressive party that is standing on an anti-Brexit, anti-austerity manifesto that will bring forward progressive policies for a socially liberal, tolerant, cohesive Britain with more investment in local government, our schools and the NHS. We need to end austerity by holding a general election and electing a Lib Dem government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I call on Councillor Jandwani?
Thank you. It's been pointed out to me that this is my maiden speech. Thank you. The Children's Commissioner estimates 4,000 children in London alone are being exploited through drug-related modern slavery, or county lines as it's termed. That is, children as young as 10 years old being trafficked to other parts of the UK, groomed by adults into distributing drugs around the country with promises of money, friendship and status. Criminals are deliberately targeting vulnerable children who are homeless, experiencing learning difficulties, going through family breakdown, struggling at school, living in care or trapped in poverty. This is children from this country, one of the richest countries in the world, can find themselves selling drugs and cutting drugs 24/7, enslaved in trap houses hundreds of miles away from their homes, living in disgusting conditions, unable to wash, sleep, eat, denied access to education and medical help, under constant threat of violence with dangerous people coming and going. They earn little money and lose all of the ties with their family and friends. These children are being forced to carry drugs in harmful ways. For example, plugging is a commonly used term to explain which is when children are forced by adults or another child to insert and carry drugs inside them. This is a clear example of child sexual abuse, as a clear example of how County Lines works. Since 2010, public services have witnessed £18 billion worth of spending cuts, with youth services, social care, early intervention, housing services particularly affected. Young men from disadvantaged communities like Haringey have been highly affected by these cuts and neoliberal austerity agenda. They can no longer access the connection service, which was disbanded by this coalition government. They can no longer access housing benefit, which was scrapped under the coalition government for 18 to 21-year-olds. Education and maintenance allowance scrapped by the coalition government in October 2010. Since 2010, over 1,000 children's centres closed, nearly 800 youth centres shut down. Their tuition fees have tripled. Youth unemployment in London is 2 times higher for young people than it is for over 25s. Austerity has removed services which protected our children from organised criminals. Dreams shattered, aspirations ended, ambitions terminated, and lives destroyed. Today, Mayor Sadiq Khan published a new City Hall research which confirms the strong links between serious youth violence and deprivation and poverty. He said in his speech today in South London, the sad reality is that the violence we are seeing on our streets today is an appalling side effect of the increasing inequality and alienation caused by years of government austerity and neglect. What is a sadder reality is that none of these cuts to services that young people need have ever saved any money. The Home Office last year stated that one murder cost the state £3.2 million. Billions of pounds wasted. Austerity is designed to keep working class people desperate, to ditch them and help them ditch their workers' rights in order to survive.
Thank you,
I'm
Councillor.
glad that this
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you.
I'm too scared to continue, so I'm going to stop.
Call on Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There is no doubt that austerity is a difficult position for any country, community or person, and austerity has different implications for different groups of people in different situations. Homes are a place where the effects of austerity are very quickly felt. Many people across London are one pay packet away from homelessness, and with the average Haringey salary being 50% of the average Haringey rent, that's the wrong way round, but you know what I mean, I don't have to tell you how close to the edge many people are living right now. I think we're already aware of how providing homes, council homes at council rents can make a difference. And when times are good, we need to be a forward-thinking council, investing, building and retaining homes for our residents. And in so doing, we can decrease the waiting list and ensure that there are more homes available at much more affordable rents. This means that residents might have an increased opportunity to maybe, and I stress the maybe, put a little by for their own rainy days. But much more importantly, it means that the council has a much greater chance of finding a suitable home for a family or individual who hits the hardest of times and loses their home. But there is little to be gained from blaming austerity for the sorry state of affairs in Haringey's council home provision. In 2009 to 2010, the council was receiving 130 applications every week and managed to house just over 1,000 people during the year, leaving almost 6,000 new applicants on the housing waiting list in that year alone. And that was before austerity began. With a booming economy and a Labour government in charge from 1997 to 2010, this council was still unable to build properties and find homes for its residents. In 1988, Haringey Council built 7 council homes, and then it didn't build a single one for a quarter of a century. In 2011 to 2013, the local MP, then Liberal Democrat Lynn Featherstone, was receiving lots of casework about poor council homes or the need to get one or the state of their council home, while Homes for Haringey, in that same period, granted staff bonuses totalling £3.7 million. Such an amount could have refurbished around 300 existing council homes. The UK has not built the homes it needs for many decades. Through times of plenty and times of austerity, when looking at the impact of austerity, we need to look at the past to learn and to plan for any future hard periods. And in so doing, we can ensure that we try to place our residents and the council in the best possible place to cope with any reductions in its budgets. And thank you. I think you learn your times from traffic wardens, Mayor.
Can I say, Dawn, that I have no control over the lights? But I do have control of the meeting. Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Since around 2011, I've worked for National Union of Teachers, as it was, and then it became the National Education Union recently. So what Councillor Chandwani said about the impact on youth is something that I also feel very strongly about. Huge cuts in education recently and massive increases in child poverty. In Tottenham, 49% of young people are growing up in poverty. In Hornsey Wood Green, it's 32%, and across the borough, it's 40%. Adding to the sort of figures that we've talked about, the IPPR recently found that 130,000 avoidable deaths have taken place in the UK since 2012. It's correct to say that austerity is a political choice, but I think we need to say more than that. We need to look at the brutal logic that underpins it, because we've been sold the lie that state spending is bad and profligate. We've been blinded to the exploitation and disdain that underpin the logic of austerity, the idea of efficiencies, but efficiencies that inevitably focus on those struggling, on workers, on the disabled, on those who in effect face the sharp end of the labour market and of capital. What was austerity really? It was the transfer of wealth from the poorest to the richest in society under the cover of this quaint notion that everyone apparently could buy into, and which the party opposite also bought into. In effect, the state was, and it still is, spending money on ameliorating the impact of the greed of big companies who refused and still refuse to pay their staff enough to live on. This is the bigger picture. We can talk about austerity, but we also need to recognise that there's a bigger thing going on here, and that's an inequality brought about by the power of big business, of capital, and of ruthless business owners. The problem is not that the state spends too much, but that we've seen a system in which these needs, the needs of big business and the market, are more important than ensuring ordinary people can live in dignity. So the deputation is very right, and I thank them for pointing out that there are long-term issues here, and that these long-term issues are effectively the triumph of the interest of capital in the world of land, but equally in the world of work. That's why, however important it was that the people have been raised out of poverty by welfare spending, we need to go much further. We need to make changes that can't simply be reversed by some charlatans who, behind the lie that they understand the economy and are sensible with money, are willing to see working people suffer and die while their friends in the city just get richer and richer. We need more state spending. We need to curb speculation in land, reverse the privatisations that have handed power to the privileged and to shareholders, and reduce accountability. We hear from the councillors opposite about their commitment to fighting austerity.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stone. Councillor Palmer.
Okay, I really am terrified I'm going last. I'm going to keep it really short. So, Madam Mayor, thank you. I am not here to squabble about national politics. Quite frankly, I think we've all played our parts in our past at national level, and we can sit here and argue over who caused what, who was worse, and who was the most to blame. But quite honestly, petty political point scoring is not going to help anyone that we were elected to represent and help. So, look, I campaigned for the Liberal Democrats during the 2017 general election because our manifesto for me did two things. It took the strongest stance against Brexit, and it also did the most to reverse the cuts to public services and welfare benefits. However, I didn't get the government that I wanted. Actually, no one who wanted less austerity got the government they wanted. And looking at the unpredictable mess that British politics is right now, I'm not sure anyone is going to definitely get the government that they want. So we can all campaign, as I'm sure we will continue to do, for change in national government. But in all honesty, the only place that councillors can be sure of making a difference is locally. So the leadership of this council must not treat austerity as an excuse for poor finances. And absolutely, it has been dealt a difficult hand. But in the past, it has continued, and it continues to play it poorly. So I'm going to skip over the examples of waste that we always chuck at you. You know what they are. But actually, there are some much bigger things at play here. So the previous administration blew millions, marching this council up and then straight back down the HDV hill. We've seen millions being spent building Osborne Grove with such poor design that it costs millions to run, millions to close, and finally millions to rebuild, barely a decade after it first opens. We all think that Haringey residents deserve better than this. And even if the Tories are defeated and we stop Brexit and this austerity ends, this council must learn to do things differently. We all know our problems as a borough didn't begin with austerity. We had some of the country's worst social deprivation a long time before Cameron and Clegg set foot in that rose garden. And you know what? We're still going to have them long after a progressive Prime Minister next comes into Downing Street, unless we all agree as an administration that nurturing and transforming our communities demands competence and pragmatism, and not tribalism or ideology from either side. Austerity or no austerity, our council taxpayers' money deserves to be spent appropriately and better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bull.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. It gives me great pleasure to follow my constituent. I think the take I would like to put on this debate tonight is quite simply the Conservatives just don't get it. They don't get it that it's not right that people have to go to food banks. As Councillor Brabazon said, we're the 6th biggest economy in the world, and we seem to take it as part and parcel of life that people can't make ends meet, that they have to go to a food bank. I mean, what is it wrong with the Conservatives when they put the country in a situation where people just can't make ends meet? Myself and the Mayor and one or two other councillors, as well as members of the public, sit on Tottenham District Charity, and week after, and Tammy does as well now, week after week after week, we get applications from people pouring their heart out. We go around and see them, and we see how difficult it is for them, trying to make ends meet. Someone trying to make £400 from a grant stretch, £180 for a washing machine. You're not going to get a very good washing machine for £180 because they want other items as well. The Conservatives just don't get it. I heard earlier Councillor Dixon mentioning about the National Health Service. I'd like to say that actually, as someone who's worked in the NHS for the last 12 years, the answer is not to just keep putting more money into the NHS. The answer is to start identifying what are the things that the national government does that disproportionately affects the NHS. So it's childhood obesity, it's dependency on alcohol, it's dependence on drugs. And the key answer, and Councillor Connor and I'm sure will agree, we've got to integrate adult social care and health once and for all. We don't say to the National Health Service, here's £10 billion, and then I'll tell you what, why don't you give me a 10-year plan on how you're going to spend that? That's the government, again, just don't get it. So the answer is to link adult social care and health together. The Tories just don't get it when they expect local authorities like Haringey, which has a disproportionately high number of small and medium shops in its borough, to be disproportionately dependent on business rates. It puts myself, as Cabinet Member for Local Investment and Economic Growth, at odds with my colleague, Councillor Ibrahim. Because when there is a piece of land, let's pick 500 White Hart Lane, had residential status, okay? Had employment status. Think of all the business rates we could have got for 500 White Hart Lane, but the pressure was on to convert that to residential status so that we could house our people. It's wrong that local authorities are put in that position. Bring back the area grant, and let's make sure we can properly deliver the services for the people of this great borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bull. Can I call on Councillor Barbara Blake?
Madam Mayor, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak in this debate. Thank you. Madam Mayor, we've had a decade of government austerity, and as colleagues have said tonight, it has devastated our society, slashed away at budgets, on policing, housing and welfare. Theresa May said last year
austerity, the era of austerity is over. Well, I say that's up for debate. And our looming Brexit departure could depress growth for years to come, meaning that the budget pressures are likely to continue for many years. And I say as well, this government, and I also say to the Lib Dems, you can minimise what happened, but I remember the chummy backslapping of Danny Alexander and Nick Clegg with George Osborne and David Cameron. I remember that. People voted for the Lib Dems because they thought they were going to be a moderate force for the Tories, but they weren't. Let's not forget that. Let's not forget what austerity has done in this borough. And you are as complacent as other people. This government has inflicted great misery on its people with punitive, mean-spirited and often calloused austerity. They were policies that were driven not by a political desire to undertake social re-engineering rather than economic necessity. And I don't need to tell anyone here about the effects of austerity. In fact, today, I've been helping one of my residents in Seven Sisters, in Lemsford Close, to put bunk beds in the living room so that their 3 children, 2 of them have got to share a bed, are sleeping in the living room. Let's think about that. I've never had to live like that. Let's think about the effect that that has on people's lives. And the fact is, it breaks my heart that that's the best that I can do for residents living in those kind of conditions. So, Madam Mayor, I hope that this council, all of us together, will start to look beyond Westminster, especially for funding, because it seems clear to me that our funding is we can no longer rely on our funding from the government. And I hope this council will be brave, for the sake of residents, in shifting its core responsibilities and drive economic growth and regeneration. I hope it will encourage new businesses to locate into Haringey. I hope it will encourage good quality jobs. And I hope our residents will have the skills and the childcare and the transport infrastructure to take up those jobs, because that's how we deliver growth. And let me just say, before Madam Mayor cuts me off, I hope that we don't just deliver decline, that we don't manage decline, but that we deliver for all the residents in this borough. Thank you.
Can I congratulate all the speakers for this debate? I've heard some really excellent speeches, and I'm really proud to be here as the chairing this meeting. Can I now call on the Cabinet Member for Finance and Strategic Regeneration to respond?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I would like to thank our guest speakers, Reverend Paul Nicholson and Jeffrey Ocean, for their presentation, which poignantly explained the devastating impact that austerity is having on our communities here in Haringey and across the country. I would also like to thank the councillors who have used their speeches to highlight their first-hand experience of central government cuts and the devastating impacts that these are having on our residents, whether it is the implementation of universal credit or cuts to our council's budget. These have very real effects which are avoidable. Since 2010, successive governments have cut our budget year on year, and in this time, our budget has reduced by 122 million, or over 100k per household in Haringey. Next year, as we approach our 10th year of austerity, we are once again being forced to cut our budget by approximately 15 million. This means reducing our expenditure by over 40k a day, every day for that financial year. It is cuts like these which mean we've had to cut back on non-essential and non-statutory spending, cutting back services across all departments. This means that since 2010, we've lost 45% of our staff. 9 years of cuts have left councils across the country cut to the curb, with the Tory-run Northamptonshire already going bust. But austerity is much more than numbers cut from our council's budget. Every pound we spend makes a real difference to residents' lives, and having that pound to spend makes a real difference too. Indeed, a recent report from the trade union Unison, in a survey of over 20,000 local government employees, revealed that 2/3 of them thought residents don't receive help and support when they need it. And more than half were not confident that vulnerable residents are safe and cared for, with 8 in 10 council workers having no confidence in the future of local services as a result of ongoing cuts. Despite this, we are trying to make a difference here in Haringey, bringing forward plans to mitigate against cuts by developing our community-led building agenda, putting real economic power back into the hands of people, and insourcing key public services to build capacity here in our council. Furthermore, we've also rolled out our council tax reduction scheme, which will save up to 6,000 residents on average £250 a year. My message to residents of Haringey is simple. We will do whatever we can to oppose Tory cuts and deliver key services which we know you rely on. But only a Labour government in Westminster will release us from the shackles of Tory austerity and help us build a Haringey for the many, not the few. Madam Mayor, I have not made a political statement in view of the fact that some of my colleagues did respond, and in particular the point that Councillor Blake made in terms of the role that I won't necessarily say the party opposite, because we have some of our members on that side, but the role that the Lib Dem played in the coalition. And I think it is very rich for them to sit here and start to try to lambast Labour. I will stop there, Madam Mayor, and thank you all for engaging in the Haringey debate about austerity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for winding up so quickly. The red light didn't get a chance. That concludes the debate. I'd like again to thank everyone for their participation in the debate. The standard of speeches were excellent. And particularly, I'd like to thank our 2 guests who are just leaving. Jeffrey?
Goodbye, guys.
Bye-bye. They've gone. I'm going to ask you all to join me in a round of applause, but they've already left the chamber. Now, I'm going to move on to... Jeffrey! Jeffrey! I'm on the right page. Yeah. I know it's 12, but I'm going to ask you something, because I'm conscious of the time. I'm conscious of the fact we've got 2 good motions to be discussed. And I was wondering whether to cut you shorter or to give up the second supplementary offer. So if a person has an oral question, they can come back for the next one. I'm asking you whether or not we should cut out the third part or carry on and see how we go. Do you want to carry on and see how we go? Okay, all right then. Let's move on then to question. Can I ask Councillor Hakata to put his question to the Cabinet Member for Local Investment and Economic Growth?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Could I ask the Cabinet Member how the new local for local investment and economic growth pushing forward this community wealth building agenda here in Haringey?
Thanks very much, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. I'm pleased to say that we're making good progress. We currently procure approximately 30% of our goods and services from local businesses and suppliers, but we're keen to do more to ensure that every Haringey pound goes further. And with that in mind, I'm looking at bringing a new procurement strategy to the Cabinet in October, and I'm going to be seeking to engage with overview and scrutiny to that end, as my predecessor did back in 2009. You may be aware the Council recently won an award for our work to enable small businesses to access procurement opportunities. Of course, procurement is only one aspect of community wealth building. A paper will be going to Cabinet in October, as I've said, which sets out the overall approach in the coming months and years, and we'll see it reflected across policies and strategies, including the economic development strategy and the Council's own workforce strategy.
Do you want to ask a supplementary?
Thanks for that. How will the Cabinet member ensure that the community wealth building is at the heart of everything we do as a council?
Well, by principally employing something that I learned in politics a long time ago, and also which I've employed in the NHS, is not to try and reinvent the wheel. So this morning I had a really good conference call with some guys from Preston, and I don't mean my colleague, the bus driver, I mean the other Preston up north, and they are a beacon borough for what we're seeking to do in Haringey. Also going to have a conversation with colleagues in Hackney and also in Newham. So really it's about taking the community wealth building ethos and applying it to what we can do in Haringey, looking at 2 or 3 key policy areas. So procurement would be one, working with local businesses would be another, and one area that I know one of my colleague over there is very concerned about is the apprenticeship strategy. So I know that we need to do much more on apprenticeships. That's 3 key areas we're going to be working on. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Councillor Bill, to date, how much community infrastructure levy money has the council spent in Haringey? Because that's a good way to help improve local communities and stimulate the borough's economy as well.
Well, I could give the answer 2 ways. I could do a George Osborne and just pick an economic figure out of the sky. But what I will do is I'll get you the figure and I'll write back to you and a copy all councillors to it. I hope that's okay. Thank you.
Councillor Da Costa.
Thank you. In light of the leader's recent column in the Ham and High, does he now regret proposing an amendment to a motion on Brexit put forward by this group so that it no longer mentioned remaining in the European Union?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Da Costa. The answer to your question is no.
Have you a supplementary?
If it is the view that the leader now supports a people vote and supports calls for an exit from Brexit, will he be willing to table a joint motion with the leader of the Liberal Democrat group to call on Haringey Council to make that announcement?
I think where we started off with, Labour had a clear position. Ultimately, yes, Labour did have a clear position, because once the referendums come back, as a result, it is wrong of us to say, do you know what, we didn't like what you said, so we're going to ignore the result of the referendum. Right? So Labour was clear that it needed to look at whether or not the referendum was the result was deliverable, and whether or not the Brexit circle could be squared. I think 2.5 years on, we're clear that the Brexit circle cannot be squared. Right? And so now it's a case of looking at how we move the whole country forward, because Brexit is a situation that it's tearing the country apart. It's dividing most parties, though not your own, right? And it's dividing many families. Right? It really is important that we find a way to deliver what is in the best interest of the country for the country. As regards to whether or not we're going to have another debate around this particular chamber, I don't think it'll be before we've got a new Prime Minister. We'll see what that new Prime Minister does and says, and then we move on from there.
Second supplementary. Can we move on? Oh, Adam.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What further proposals or opportunities can the Council leader provide to all members in this chamber to express their support for staying in the European Union?
I think we're going to have a number of... well, it depends about... The Labour members are going to have conversations within the party, as for us pushing people higher up the party to make a clear decision on where we should be going when the next Prime Minister decides he wants to push Britain out on a no-deal Brexit. I think it's important that as a party we stand united and we stand together. when we have those conversations, not just internally, but also externally with electors up and down the country. Now, obviously, the Lib Dems are in a slightly different position because, you know, they never believed that the referendum result was worth paying attention to anyway, right? But we gave it our best shot, and it hasn't been where we are at the moment. So there's two different conversations. The conversation Labour needs to have, there's a conversation the Conservatives need to have, and there's a conversation the Lib Dems need to have, right? The Conservative conversation, I'm looking forward to that one, right? Because quite frankly, they're not going to be able to deliver what they want. But I think the question you asked me is about what Labour should be doing, and Labour should be agreeing amongst itself its position so that we can win the next general election.
Councillor Say.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is to Councillor Blake. What is the Cabinet member doing to stop young people growing up in Haringey from falling into crime?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to thank Councillor Say for this very important question, and I'd also like to thank Councillor Chandwani for pinching a big piece of my response in her speech. It was very kind of useful background. I just want to add in terms of background, we had Yvonne Lawson here, I think, at full council last year speaking about her report, which the previous administration had commissioned, speaking to 70 young people in Tottenham, and how violence was impacting on their lives. And one of the kind of key features, I think, from that report was the level of antipathy that was expressed by the young people in relation to police officers, which I think we're very much used to, but teachers, social workers, young people spoke about not even phoning an ambulance if they or their friends were the victim of a stabbing. So I think that's an important context, that issue around mistrust. And one of the points that I failed to raise in my previous opening around the community safety strategy is, of course, that Haringey laments at number 33 in terms of MOPAC's survey around trust and confidence in policing, and that's something which is a real priority for us as a borough. I want to acknowledge the piece of work that Councillor Chandwani highlighted earlier as well, around that the Mayor of London launched today. And I also want to acknowledge the comprehensive youth risk strategy, which has come to Cabinet and come here to be approved, and that we've placed vulnerable children, our most vulnerable children, at its core. Those in the care system, those at risk of being excluded from school or have been excluded from school, those with SEN and mental health needs, and young black boys. The other aspect I really want to highlight within this space as well in terms of context is the great work that our staff do across children's services in early years, our social workers, our youth offending support staff, our youth workers, but they've been doing that in the background of reducing resources, and it's become tougher and tougher every day for them. But I just want to acknowledge that great work that goes on there. I'm going to speak very briefly, because I've said this before, in terms of some of the practical things that we're doing, the increased investment in our youth services and diversionary projects with support from Sadiq Khan, the community goal projects, the detached youth workers, which the leader mentioned in his speech, and supporting our multi-agency efforts to support those children, as Councillor Chandwani highlighted, who are being coerced into criminality at an earlier and earlier age through the work of our exploitation panel and our staff within children's services working with multi-agency partners and obviously the police within that space. But the Council is also committed to address some of the more, dare I say, thornier challenges and issues around this agenda. And that's why officers in community safety, in my area of responsibility, are working with Met colleagues on setting up an independent advisory group for young people in Haringey on policing. And this is being facilitated independently by Mind in Haringey. And that's going to be a challenging process moving forward. And that's why officers in our children's services are in dialogues with Met colleagues on that whole area around the first-time arrests of children and the impact of stop and search, because we know that it's a younger and younger age group that are being pulled into that first-time arrest space and are being stopped and searched at a younger age. And I'm going to be having discussions with the borough commander specifically around that whole agenda around stop and search. And that's why, Madam Mayor, in September, as I believe, as I've been told by colleagues at the Children's Rights Alliance England, who are supporting us in this event, that we're possibly the first local authority to adopt reducing the criminalisation of children as a corporate objective within our borough plan. So we'll be holding a workshop here with partners to look at what practically we need to be doing within the borough to make progress on this objective. It will be challenging, but we don't duck the challenges here. And that's why we're carrying out a comprehensive review of alternative provision for children excluded from school and the future Our Pupil Referral Unit, which Councillor Brabazon is leading on and I'm supporting. So within this agenda, I just want to raise a couple of points. The first, I think, is that there's an onus for us to acknowledge the rather punitive mindset we have as a nation in this space.
Councillor Blake, you know there's two more questions that aimed at you.
All right,
you're taking up so much time. I know what you're saying is very interesting, but I want to hear Councillor Save's second question to you, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What community organisations have you worked with to develop these strategies?
And can you please be brief?
All right, I'll be brief. We're working with a range of community organisations, and I can come back with a fuller list around that. One of the things I've tried to emphasise in those dialogues is I want to see local organisations. That doesn't mean to say that I've got anything against a lot of very good national organisations out there, but I just think that the balance, if you like, has kind of swung the other way. So I think hopefully you'll see within the work that we've done in terms of the Mayor's Fund, there's very much been an onus on local community organisations, and I really want to see that built into our commissioning. And I think that links into Councillor Bull's agenda around local wealth building. We've got a lot of very good local organisations, a lot of people working in the community who, frankly, we haven't worked effectively with in the past, we haven't supported. It's very difficult in the current context, but I'm certainly looking to do more of that work with some of our local organisations.
Thank you. Councillor Emery to Councillor Hearn.
Councillor Hearn, what specific measures to combat climate change has the Council taken since declaring a climate emergency?
Okay, is that working? Yeah. Okay, great. Madam Mayor, if you could verbally indicate to me if I go on too long, I hope I won't, because I can't see any of your waving cards. Declaring a climate emergency is just the beginning of the action that we are taking. I don't believe in making statements without having things behind them. We will bring the action plan, which we're working on at the moment, to the full Council by December this year. The plan will outline how we will achieve a zero carbon for as soon as possible. It will describe what all council departments will do to take action, including working with communities, the voluntary sector, statutory partners and others to drive change across the borough. We will support neighbourhoods to also take action together, like we are in Crouch End. Last week we hosted the first London, I have difficulty with this word, livable neighbourhoods at Alexander Palace Conference. Haringey was one of the first boroughs to receive livable neighbourhood funding from the Mayor of London. We got 4.8 million to do the work in Crouch End. Livable Crouch End, or lovable Crouch End as my spell checker likes to call it, will create a more people-friendly environment, bringing residents, visitors, businesses and others together. It will drive what you like to say in transport world, modal change, which means getting out of the car, getting onto your feet, getting onto bicycles, getting onto the bus. This is essential if we're ever going to make a difference. Our children's lungs are thoroughly clogged, and the work we will do in Crouch End, I hope, will be the beginning of a number of pieces of work we will do across the borough to make that change, to bring about cleaner air, to bring about modal shift. We've implemented the first borough school street scheme, and we do another action plan. You know I love an action plan, but I like to make sure we know where we're going. We're bringing another one of those forward in March, coming up next year, because we've got quite a lot of work to do to identify the good schools that we can do this with. We've done some consultation on our own ultra-low emission zone action plan. We've made an agreement with TfL around the deployment of rapid charging points to power electric cars, although, of course, electric cars are not the answer. in many ways because they also produce dangerous particulates which clog people's lungs. We're supporting N10 Energy. It's a community energy company. They've already installed solar panels on Fortis Green School, and they're going to be installing solar panels on a number of individual homes across the borough as well. And they're very keen on working with us to try and work with schools to get more solar panels on all those lovely roofs on all our schools, because there's a huge lot we can do. And their latest plan, of course, will be really supporting them in this, is wanting to work with our leisure providers to provide solar panels and alternative energy sources for that too. We host the Community Energy Networking session with our neighbouring boroughs and the community to build up ideas amongst the community and capacity to be able to support them to take forward these initiatives with us. We installed a new low carbon community heating system in Broadwater Farm, and we've been developing the borough's new affordable energy strategy to address the increasing number of homes in fuel poverty in the borough. We have lots more plans, and I very much welcome your interactions and work with us on this.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. Thank you. Supplementary, yes?
Thank you for that list of things you are going to do in the future. You mentioned the need to move out of harmful pollution-emitting cars. With this in mind, how many kilometres of segregated bike lanes does the Council currently have plans to build, and how many kilometres have already been delivered during this administration?
I hope you don't mind. I'm going to come back to you on that. I don't have the figures to hand, but I agree with... Sorry? What did you say?
Councillor Rice, have we got a supplementary?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You have given us some detail. Could I ask, how is the Council working with other stakeholders to help them combat climate change?
Yes, well, as I said earlier, we've done some work with amongst community groups who are working around producing energy, and part of our strategy around climate change is actually to work with the voluntary sector to produce action together, because actually we're not going to do this without that. And for example, there's a really excellent group in Crouch End. I know it's Crouch End again, but it's a really good group called Plastic Free Crouch End, and we are developing our own strategy for the council, for its partners and others, and we will be making sure that we try and deliver. And we're using that group's advice to us is very important, because what we want to do is to support other communities and other groups to take similar action as well, because we can't just do it from the council, we have to do it from everybody else too.
Thank you. In the absence of Councillor Amin, Councillor Ejiofor will be responding. So, Councillor Stone, your question to Councillor Ejiofor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What is the Council doing to promote healthier lifestyles in Haringey?
Thank you very much for that question, Councillor Stone. Our recently published Physical Activity and Sports Strategy takes a whole system approach to increasing physical activity, with a vision to create and embed a culture of activity so that Haringey becomes one of the most physically active and healthy London boroughs. The strategy emphasises that physical activity behaviours are affected by a myriad of factors, ranging from lifestyle and social physical environment to that of being more physically active, and it's key to encourage more people to adapt and adopt healthier lifestyles. As a council, we continue to work with a range of stakeholders, including TfL, to attract funding streams that enable us to encourage smarter and active travel through activities such as Dr. Bike and bikeability courses for beginners.
Councillor Stone, supplementary.
Thank you. How will the strategy increase access for the residents from the most deprived areas of the borough?
I think the key to improving overall health for the entire borough is to work with people who are least likely to take advantage of some of the things that we need to do. One of the questions we're always hearing is how the people who suffer most from bad air and bad air quality are people who live in the poor areas, people who are least likely to have cars, least likely to pollute. I think it's important that we work with stakeholders, we work with communities, and we look at how our concession schemes, with the things that we're doing as a council, enable people financially to get involved in some of the things that we want them to do to make them live a healthier lifestyle.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dennison to Councillor Ejiofor.
Given the council's strained financial situation, why doesn't it merit a standalone cabinet position?
Thank you very much, Councillor Dennison. I know that you're one of these councillors who does lots and lots of research around the questions that you ask. So I think you're obviously clear that it's common practice throughout London boroughs to combine the finance portfolio with another policy area. Our neighbours, Camden, Enfield, Hackney, Islington and Waltham Forest, all combine their finance portfolios, for example. In Haringey, we've decided that the significant overlap between the council's ambitious regeneration projects and the borough around the borough merited closer coordination with our financial capacity to deliver them. I have faith in the ability of the Cabinet Member for Finance and Strategic Regeneration to fulfil the nature of his portfolio effectively.
When the previous Cabinet Member for Finance resigned, he said that he could no longer support decisions that he considered financially risky and imprudent. What decisions do you think he was referring to, and do you think Councillor Adjei has done enough to restore faith among his backbench councillors?
Put quite simply, if you want to know what Councillor Berryman thought, I suggest you ask Councillor Berryman.
Can I thank you all very, very much for this debate. The oral questions are really good, and the written questions, obviously, you're going to get a response to. Now, we have two motions for debate. So, first of all, I'd like to ask Councillor Corley Harrison to propose this motion, and he has up to 5 minutes, which I hope he won't take.
Well, maybe, we'll see. Often when people propose a motion in this chamber, they will open their speeches with how proud or delighted they are to be bringing forward their motion, and rightly so. Parties on both sides have proposed motions over the last year that have brought about changes that I'm sure we can all be proud of. Sadly, this evening, I can't say that I'm delighted to be bringing forward my motion. In fact, I'm deeply disappointed. I'm disappointed that a world that I thought had become gradually more tolerant, more progressive, and more accepting throughout my lifetime has in recent years seen a rise in hate crime, a rise in bigotry, and a rise in people unwilling to accept that people are who they are, can be whoever they want to be, and can love whoever they fall in love with. What I am proud of, however, is who I am. I'm a proud member of the LGBT+ community. I'm a proud father to a daughter with 2 dads. I suspect the first councillor in Haringey's history to have a child born through surrogacy to a same-sex couple. And I'm proud to live in Haringey, a borough that is home to the MP, Lynn Featherstone, who allowed me and thousands of other individuals in this country the ability to marry who they love, regardless of gender. The rise in hate crime in the last few years has not been specific in its nature. Whether you are black or white, Muslim or Jewish, gay or trans, you will have experienced it. Whether it's to you personally, to a friend or family member, to a friend of a friend, or even just cases in the media, all minority groups have been victims. But the rise in hate crime against the LGBT+ community has been particularly pronounced. Over the past 5 years, homophobic hate crime has doubled and transphobic hate crime has trebled. In the last year, almost half of these offences included violence. Many in the LGBT+ community thought we were turning a corner when, as a backbench MP, Ed Davey brought about the repealing of Section 28 in 2003, and again in 2010 with the Equalities Act, and again in 2013 with the Marriage Act. But the recent protests around Birmingham schools against the No Outsiders project, which was introduced to teach children about the Equality Act and celebrated the diversity of everyone in our country, including those that identify as LGBT+, shows they are much further away from that corner than we thought. When MPs like Roger Godsiff and Esther McVeigh came out in support of the protests, when their political parties failed to take action on them doing so, they became complicit in homophobia. It's as simple as that. But no one is born homophobic. No one is born transphobic. The bigotry against minority groups is a learned trait. These protests are creating a culture of acceptance that allows the oppression of the LGBT+ community. When the next Prime Minister of our country is calling gay people tank-topped bum boys and compared same-sex marriage to bestiality with no recourse, is it any surprise that this culture of acceptance continues? Last month, a 12-year-old boy was arrested in Liverpool for a violent homophobic attack on a couple in their 30s. 12 years old, only just out of primary school, an age deemed too young by protesters to learn about different types of relationships. I'm sure most of you will have seen the image of the young female couple that were attacked on a bus recently in our neighbouring borough of Camden. Their 4 attackers were aged between 15 and 18. I don't want my daughter to grow up in a world where relationship education leaves her questioning her family unit because her school is unwilling to teach about same-sex couples. Or a world where she is fearful for her own safety, not just because of her own identity, but because of mine. I don't want our country to continue being one where in a single year, 800 Birmingham children are calling Childline because of fears about their sexuality or gender, or the bullying they have faced. Where children are telling other children they should kill themselves because they are gay, bisexual or trans. Education around all different relationships and all different individuals is vital for our society. LGBT+ inclusive education in schools is not about trying to turn children gay or sexualise relationships, as protesters have claimed. It is not propaganda. It is teaching of the fantastic beauty of the individualism that exists within our society. And as elected representatives, we at the very least should stand up and say to all LGBT+ children, adults and families, not only will we stop those that try and erase you from history, but we are your allies, your supporters, your friends and your community. We will protect you and we will proudly support the teaching of diversity of this country. Indeed, for many of us, we are you. With that in mind, I ask all members of this council to not only support this motion, but leave here tonight with the intention to do everything in their power to create a greater, safer space for tolerance and champion the teaching of an LGBT inclusive curriculum in all of our schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. It was excellent. And you know that I raised the flag outside on Saturday and Councillor Grunes was with me. And it's still flying proudly now. And you must be pleased that Alan Turing is now going to be on the £50 note after the disgusting thing that happened to him with the Tory government. Can I now call on Councillor Shinner, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As education spokesperson for the Haringey Liberal Democrats and as a parent, I cannot begin to express how strongly I feel about the importance of LGBT+ education at schools. I have children, nieces and nephews at primary and secondary schools in Haringey and have witnessed firsthand how prevalent homophobic and transphobic bullying is. I have heard boys as young as 7 use the word gay as a derogatory term to suggest that other boys are weak, soft or effeminate in some way. Children who are not much older and still at primary school start using this term to imply that someone is sexually different and therefore weird. Depressingly, my children, niece and nephews have all commented on how commonplace this sort of abuse is. Now, precisely because this sort of homophobic behaviour begins so early, proper LGBT+ inclusive relationship education must also start at primary school. A child's first lesson about LGBT+ people should be from a teacher in the classroom, not a bully in the playground. There is nothing age inappropriate about children learning that families like Councillor Corley-Harrison's exist and stigma against them is wrong. And we can't afford complacency here. The shameful fact is that 45% of LGBT pupils are bullied at secondary school, and 9% of trans pupils have received death threats. Unless children here
a counter-narrative to these toxic attitudes from key authority figures in their life, there is a high risk that they will carry these prejudices into adulthood. I want my children to feel loved, accepted, and comfortable with who they are, wherever they are. I want the same for every child, and I reject the idea that a minority of parents can ask a school to take that away from any child. As Stonewall put it, teaching about the diversity that exists in the world means that children from all families feel included and helps all young people understand that LGBTQ people are part of everyday life. As councillors, we can all do our bit towards building a more tolerant and caring society by supporting this motion. Thank you.
We usually have a debate for 30 minutes, but given the time, I've accepted 2 speakers from the Labour group, and they will then move to the right to reply and vote on the motion. But before they do, can I just say to you that I have a gay grandson who is now happily married and is also going the same procedure as Councillor Luke, yeah? And hopefully I shall soon have 16 great-grandchildren instead of 15. Councillor Brabazon, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, I speak as Cabinet Member for Children and Families, and there is nothing to say that would oppose this motion, as you all appreciate. The Mayor stole my line. It's fitting we are discussing this tonight because Alan Turing will be the face on our £50 notes. And I think we ought to remember that this great man was victimised for being gay, was threatened with prison, and only avoided it by accepting medical castration. And he died in 1954, presumably by his own hand, which is 65 years ago. So we should be proud that our country has changed since then, and that we are a more open and tolerant society, and the scourge and injustices of Section 28 brought in by a Tory government are gone. Our schools have a very proud tradition of educating young people inclusively on LGBT issues. In the 1980s, our teachers and politicians opposed Section 28 with a jointly organised Positive Images campaign. This defied bigotry and faced down adverse publicity generated at the time by tabloid journalists. Positive Images was a manifesto commitment, and the campaign was set up by a local Labour activist from Haringey, who many of us will remember, a teacher, Mandy Mudd, who was targeted by the Murdoch press and vilified. She sadly died a few years ago. They conducted a proxy war of vilification against Bernie Grant and councillors like Jeremy Corbyn and Baroness Osamore. They ran a vicious campaign against our anti-racist and positive images teaching programmes in schools. They accused us of having race spies in the classroom. It's hard to remember these things went on in the 1980s, but they did. Everybody will remember the campaign against a book called Jenny Lives with Erica Martin, which was another vilification campaign, and they made things up. Remember the Bar Green Sheep story promoted in the tabloid press? And our politicians were alleged to have changed the gay at the end of Haringey to gay with an A, provoking outrage. Entirely unfounded stories which provoked outrage in the press. None of this was true. It just went to destroy what people were trying to do. But the reality in our schools is professional and pragmatic. In addition to being highly successful, our schools are welcoming, tolerant, open-minded institutions, and differences are explored and celebrated. Anybody who's been to any of our primary schools, our nurseries and our secondaries will know that. And our teachers are highly trained professionals. They deal sensitively and age-appropriately with sex and relationship education. The Council has no locus in determining curriculum, but our ethos here in our family of schools means we can be justly proud of our anti-racist, anti-sexist and anti-bigotry culture. It runs like a golden thread through all our practice and has gone on for many years and is envied elsewhere. There is just one factual correction, if I might. Mary Boosted is the Joint Secretary of the NEU and no longer the ATL merged with the NEU, and I hope you'll accept that as a small correction to your motion, not an amendment, just a correction, so that we are factually correct. Our work has been very good in this borough, and we should be proud of what we've done.
Councillor Ibrahim, can I remind you, you have 3 minutes.
I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. And actually, Councillor Brabazon has covered a lot of what I wanted to cover in my response. But I'm glad that Councillor Brabazon spoke about what Haringey did in the 1980s with children in our schools. I'm proud to say I came to Haringey in 1986 and started primary school, and along with some of my fellow councillors, we were the children that were part of what became known as the Haringey experiment. And little did I only found out in my 20s that actually what we were apparently being taught in schools in Haringey had become the eye of a political storm, actually. And I just want to remind everybody of my comrade, sister, fellow councillor Hearn, and the pioneering work she did as part of the Haringey Equalities Unit at the time. And I think we really need to recognise that, and the significant work that Haringey Black Action did at the time around challenging those prejudices within communities, but also some of my fellow councillors who are not only students or pupils at the time, but who were teaching in schools at the time, Councillor, Madam Mayor, Councillor Peacock and Councillor Davis as well. And this idea that, that was being put about at the time, that we were being taught, 5-year-old children were being taught about gay sex in primary schools, and this idea that we were effectively being kind of educated to be gay. And I think that the challenge that we face with the debate in Birmingham is, what I will say and what I will make absolutely clear, is what I learned in a Haringey school at the time was respect, was to respect the local community, to respect choices, and the fact that the primary focus of what I learned, and I'm gonna be honest, you know, we continued to hear homophobic abuse in schools. The idea that it changed overnight, that's not true. But many of us of that generation who grew up within that environment are highly appreciative of the things that we were taught in Haringey schools, and very proud of that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now call on Councillor Corley Harrison to reply.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A bit less croaky this time. Thank you, Sakina, Zina, Amina, for your contributions. I'm glad that everyone is on board with what has been proposed tonight. What any minority group will tell you is that allies can be some of the most important people in both your life and your fight. And because I assume that most councillors, hopefully all councillors in this room, count themselves as an ally of the LGBT+ community, I wanted to summarise with a poem from a straight friend shared with me on the 6th of June, which many of you will know was Pride Day this year, on the importance of being an ally. It's only short, I promise you. What matters is the being there, being here, being up, standing out, whether you're in or out. What matters is that presence, public presence, makes all the difference. What matters is that hope turns bitter when it's hidden, that love turns cold when it's denied. What matters is that I am me here, that I am as out as I am, as straight as I am, as queer as I am, as ordinary and extraordinary and genuinely authentically me as I am, whoever I am, and over time that can change. What matters is that gay kids in small towns and queer kids in big towns and bi kids in cold towns and trans kids in hometowns and gender fluid kids in big old cities know that we are here, that there is a here, there is a we here, there is a place to be here, that here is for everyone and here is for anyone, because love is a love no matter who you love. So I look forward to everyone becoming an ally tonight. Thank you.
We now vote on the motion. All those in favour? Well, I think that's pretty... none against. That's absolutely tremendous. I'm really pleased, really pleased. I now call on Councillor Jogi to propose his motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. It's a pleasure to speak this evening, and I hope you unite the two parties in the Chamber and all the people that we represent out in this community. Just one point, Madam Mayor. Due to Councillor Carlin's elevation to serve as your deputy, she is no longer able to speak from the floor of this chamber, and so is not able to second the motion tonight. So in other words, she's been silenced, which, for those who know Dana, isn't something that happens very often. But I'd like to thank Councillor Weston for joining in the Hornsey double act. We are all in public life for different reasons. I remain honoured to serve the community I've lived in my whole life. But for all the different reasons and all our different political parties, views, experiences and priorities, we are all here, I think, to make the world a better place, to stand up for what's right and to challenge injustice wherever we find it. So I'd like to pay tribute to the Hornsey and Green Labour Party for passing a motion on this issue at a meeting in early 2019, and of course to Catherine West MP. Just today she was up in the House in Home Office questions taking the fight to this Tory government on this and many other similar issues. It's shameful that in the UK, it is shameful that the UK has one of the largest immigration detention systems in Europe. I call out this Tory government, the coalition before it, and indeed the last Labour government too. All political parties have to take responsibility for the fact that innocent people, many fleeing war and famine, have been left waiting for months and years for the Home Office to determine their future. I can't imagine, even begin to imagine, how distressing it must be to be stuck in such limbo, to face such hostility and such uncertainty. Our country is in uncharted waters, and we all know how unsettling and frustrating uncertainty is. Who will be the next Prime Minister? Will we ever leave the EU? When will the Labour Party sort out its Europe policy? How were the Liberals able to be in government with the Tories for 5 long years? But can you imagine how it must be to sit in a cold, damp space that you don't know isn't yours and isn't home? No human being in this world deserves that, and certainly not here in the UK. We may be looking inwards when it comes to our relationship with Europe, but we cannot look backwards when it comes to doing the right thing. I've got a bit here saying well done to the Labour Party for finally saying it'll campaign for Remain in a second referendum, but probably not relevant. This motion, Madam Mayor, provides all members of this authority with a chance... That wasn't meant to be nice to you guys, by the way. Far from it. It's your fault we're in the mess. Anyway, provides all members of this authority with a chance to say very clearly that we think these walls must fall, and that we endorse the campaign to end immigration detention totally and without equivocation. This motion calls upon David Lammy MP and Catherine West MP to continue campaigning loudly, proudly and tirelessly in Tottenham and in Hornsey Green on this issue. We acknowledge their work to date and their commitment, and we thank them both for it. Having spent 5 years working for Diane Abbott, I know that this country will soon have a Home Secretary who is committed to changing, fighting and ending the inequalities and injustices that continue to blight the lives of thousands. In my view, immigration detention is disproportionate and is inappropriate. Above and beyond all the other adjectives you could choose, only one comes to mind. Immigration detention is simply wrong. The Shadow Home Secretary has said that the hostile environment will be over, dead, gone, finished, buried, done on day one of a Labour government, and that day can't come soon enough. I should say, though, that as I left the door with my P45, she got promoted to Shadow Home Secretary. What that says about me, I don't know. But tonight we have the chance to show solidarity. We have the chance to speak up with one loud voice, majority and minority, red and yellow, orange, pale blue. But that, in the words of Jamaica's first woman Prime Minister, time come. We won't stand for indefinite immigration detention any longer. We won't walk by on the other side, and we won't be blind to injustice. And I ask all colleagues to stand up and be counted and support the motion tonight.
I call on Councillor Weston.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Jogi has highlighted a number of problems with the current system of immigration detention in the UK, and these problems are numerous. So numerous, in fact, that only a couple of months ago, the House of Commons Home Affairs Committee stated, we have found serious problems with almost every element of the immigration detention system. People are being wrongfully detained, held in immigration detention when they are vulnerable, and detained for too long. Rather than try to cover all of these problems, in seconding this motion, I would like briefly, I hope, Madam Mayor, specifically to highlight the experiences of women who are subject to immigration detention, many of whom are held in Yarlswood. A few years ago, the charity and campaigning organisation Women for Refugee Women interviewed 46 women who had been subject to immigration detention, mainly in that centre. Their testimonies are nothing but heartbreaking. 72% of the women interviewed had been raped. 41% had been tortured. Over 50% said they had been persecuted because they are women, and 18% said they had been persecuted because they are lesbians. Madam Mayor, these are women who have fled from the most appalling violence and who have sought safety in Britain. And yet the choices of successive governments have been to detain these women in shameful conditions, which cause themselves significant mental ill health. Almost all the women interviewed by Women for Refugee Women felt depressed, 85% felt scared, and over half had contemplated suicide. Madam Mayor, these women have experienced things in their lives that no one anywhere should have to experience. And their treatment in immigration detention in this country does nothing but add to their trauma, and it is shameful. If we believe in a decent and humane society, our aim should be to support these women. And if that is our aim, then the current system of immigration detention must be brought to an end. Madam Mayor, I second this motion.
Thank you very much. And I see that we have an amendment. Can I ask who's moving the amendment? Would you like to speak for 5 minutes, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we do welcome this motion and support the principle of ending detention of migrants for all the reasons that have already been set out. The Liberal Democrats have and continue to fight for a more compassionate immigration system that treats all migrants, refugees and asylum seekers with dignity. This is why we supported Haringey's Welcome's motion in November 2018. In Parliament, our MPs have sought to end the decades of incompetencies in the system by calling for a limit to detention to 28 days, calling for the lifting of the ban on asylum seekers, and scrapping the net migration target, and many more. As I've said previously in this chamber, immigration brings many benefits to our communities, our economy and our public services, especially our NHS. This is why I have always been proud, and I am proud to be a member of the party that has never had policies to deter migrants from this country, and have, in relation to Brexit, fiercely supported the freedom of movement. While we support this motion, we believe it should specifically highlight the evils of detention of children and why it must end now. Whilst I know that my colleague over here has already expressed that it's unnecessary for this motion, but I do believe that our amendment sets this out, and I urge you to support it because of that. I'm happy to hear, given the spirit of collaboration we've had tonight, that it would be supported. Children are the most vulnerable of all migrants through no fault of their own. A recent report by the Children's Rights Alliance for England highlighted the ongoing practice of children being held in detention centres, even though the Lib Dems successfully ended the detention of children and Dungaver House and the family unit at the notorious Yarlswood. We also campaigned for an alternative, which saw the opening of Cedars, run by Bernardo's, in 2011. However, this is now at risk under the Tory government, who now want to close the centre and want to reintroduce the detention of children at Tinsley House near Gatwick, going back to putting them behind barbed wire fencing. We only have to look across the Atlantic at the images we've seen of children kept in cages, and I'm sure we've all heard the recordings of children crying after being taken away from their parents at the US border. The pictures of children dying and those that do survive and make it over here to only be detained. These are children who have no understanding of what is happening around them. They are innocent, vulnerable children. It would be a stain on our society if we allowed this to happen here. As I've said, I fully support this important motion and its objective, but it could be stronger for the sake of vulnerable children. And I hope, and I think we are, both parties are going to come together tonight, and both of our parties in Parliament are also coming together to continue to fight the end of detention centres, especially for children. Thank you.
Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will just say I'm seconding the amendment. I hope that you will support it. And in fear of Madam Mayor and her red light, I'll leave it as a simple secondment.
All those in favour of the amendment, please show. Goodness gracious me. How wonderful. Twice in one night. Thank you so much. Any against? None against. That's absolutely brilliant. We now need to vote on the motion as amended. Yes? I beg your pardon? It's not on the script in front of me, I'm sorry. And I'm sure I'd love to hear Adam speaking again, but I think that even Adam... Pardon? You want to speak? Adam, do you want to speak?
Madam Mayor, thanks for the important and cooperative contributions from the opposition benches, and I'm glad that for once one of the most partisan people in the Chamber has proposed something that's brought us all together, and I hope all colleagues will support the motion as amended.
Thank you so much, Adam. So, can we see the vote, please, on the motion as amended? Thank you so much. Those against? That's been carried. NEMCOM? Is that the question? And with that, goodness gracious me, I think the meeting is over. Oh. Before you all jump up, can I jump up and say that I've really enjoyed chairing this meeting today. So thank you very much, all of you. Thank you.